You people need to find somewhere else. This ain't your kind of place.
I have a signed lease, Mr. Burkhart.
He said it loud enough for the whole parking lot to hear.
A lease? Sweetheart, leases get lost all the time around here.
Then it's a good thing I kept copies.
Copies won't help you. Nobody here is gonna take your side.
He didn't notice the clipboard behind him, but she did, and everything was about to change. Glen Burkhart thought he owned everything at Magnolia Ridge. The buildings, the lot, the people, especially the people. And on a Tuesday afternoon in late July, with the Georgia heat pressing down like a flat iron on wet cotton, he stood in the middle of that cracked asphalt parking lot like a man surveying his kingdom. Except his kingdom was falling apart. And he didn't care. That was the thing about Glen. He didn't care about the place. He cared about the power the place gave him. Magnolia Ridge sat at the dead end of County Road 14 in Holt County, Georgia. 16 units of low-rise brick apartment buildings arranged in a horseshoe around a lot that hadn't been resealed since the Obama administration. The drainage ditch along the south side held standing water so old it had turned green, breeding mosquitoes fat enough to cast shadows. Paint peeled off the stairwell railings in long curls. Half the porch lights were dead. Unit 12's window had been patched with cardboard and packing tape for so long the cardboard had faded from brown to gray. Cicadas screamed from the tree line behind the dumpsters, and the dumpsters themselves, oh, the dumpsters. Lids warped open, bags split, a smell that hit you 20 feet out like a wall you walked into face first. This was a place someone owned but did not love. A place someone squeezed for rent checks and starved of every dollar that might have kept it livable. That someone was standing right there in the lot, chest puffed forward, arms crossed, weight shifted back on his heels like the world owed him a lien. Glen Burkhart, mid-50s, stocky, barrel-chested, ruddy pinkish-tan skin flushed even redder in the heat. Thinning, sandy blonde hair combed back from a receding hairline, damp at the temples. Pale blue eyes that looked at everything like it was for sale, and he was deciding whether to lowball. He wore a white cotton polo shirt with a thin navy stripe at the collar, tucked crisp into pressed tan khakis, brown leather belt, brown leather loafers scuffed at the toes. And that silver Bluetooth earpiece, always that earpiece, blinking blue in his left ear like a little electronic heartbeat, reminding him he was important. He was always on a call. Or pretending to be on a call, or just ended a call. The earpiece was his crown. Next to him, half a step behind and slightly to the left like a dog trained to heel, stood Dale Renfro. Early 20s, wiry, slim, dark brown shaggy hair falling over his ears, hazel green eyes that wouldn't land on anything for more than a second. He had a gray cotton work shirt with a chest pocket, faded olive cargo pants, dusty tan steel-toe boots. The ring of brass maintenance keys clipped to his belt loop jangled every time he shifted his weight, which was constantly. Dale's shoulders were rounded, his hands shoved in his pockets, and he stared at the asphalt like it held the answers to questions he was too afraid to ask. He didn't want to be here. You could see that from across the lot. But Dale did what Glen told him. That was the arrangement. And in front of Unit 7B, standing straight-backed on the sidewalk with her chin level and her hands clasped in front of her, was Denise Carter. A padlock, a brand-new brass padlock that still caught the sun, hung from the hasp on her front door. 2 suitcases sat on the concrete beside her. One was gray, one was brown, both were old, and both were stuffed so full the zippers strained. A cardboard box of kitchen things rested on top of the gray one. A plastic bag of toiletries dangled from its handle. Everything she had, apparently, right there on the sidewalk, baking. Denise was petite, 5'3", medium brown skin, mid-30s. Jet black natural hair pulled up in a simple, flat twist updo. Deep brown eyes. A faint birthmark near her left temple, a light scatter of freckles across the bridge of her nose. She wore a faded lavender cotton sundress with thin shoulder straps over a white short-sleeve undershirt, the hem falling below her knee, teal flip-flops from the dollar store on her feet, and on her left ring finger, catching the same sun as that padlock, a thin gold wedding band. She looked like someone with nothing. Remember that. "I told you people last week." Glen's voice carried across the entire parking lot, bouncing off brick. He wasn't talking to Denise like a person. He was talking at her like a stain he wanted removed. Rent was due on the 1st. The 1st. Not the 5th, not the 10th, not whenever you feel like gracing me with it. Denise didn't flinch. "My lease allows a 5-day grace period, Mr. Burkhart. It's the 4th. He didn't hear her. Men like Glen never hear the answer when they've already decided on the sentence. "You people bring the roaches. You bring the smell." He waved his hand at the air like the whole complex's neglect was something she carried in with her. "I own this property and I own this conversation. You don't get to quote paperwork at me when you can't even keep your unit fit for human habitation." The unit whose porch light he never fixed. The unit whose kitchen faucet dripped brown water every 3rd Tuesday. The unit whose air conditioning hadn't worked since May. Denise's hands stayed clasped. Her chin stayed level. "I have documentation of every maintenance request I've submitted. 7 in the last 90 days. None completed." Glen laughed. Actually laughed. A short, wet bark of a laugh that said he found her composure personally offensive. Behind curtains in units 6A, 8B, and 9A, faces watched. Nobody came outside. Nobody ever came outside when Glen was in the lot. That was the kind of landlord he was. He turned to Dale. "She's still here in 20 minutes. Put her stuff on the curb, all of it." He said it the way you'd say, "Take out the trash." Then he walked to his white Escalade, popped the door, climbed in, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. The Bluetooth earpiece blinked. He was already on another call. Already past it. Already done with her. He genuinely believed that was the end of it. Denise sat on that curb. She didn't cry. She set her hands on her knees, and the gold wedding band caught the light one more time, and she watched the heat shimmer rise off the asphalt. In 41 hours, Glen Burkhart would not own this property or anything else free and clear. He just didn't know it yet. Denise sat on that curb with her belongings baking in the sun, watching Glen's white Escalade disappear down the county road. He thought the conversation was over. He had no idea it was just starting. 6 months earlier, before the padlock, before the parking lot, before Glen Burkhart ever heard the name Denise Carter. Let me tell you who this woman actually is, because Glen saw the flip-flops. He saw the faded lavender sundress. He saw a quiet black woman with a flat twist updo and a 12-year-old Honda, and he thought he understood her entire life story in 3 seconds flat. That's the thing about people like Glen. They look at the surface and they think they're looking at the bottom. Denise Carter graduated from Howard University with a 3.9 GPA, political science, minor in urban studies. She walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, and drove straight to Georgetown Law. Not Georgetown the neighborhood, Georgetown the law school, one of the most competitive legal programs in the country. She passed the bar on her first attempt at 25 years old, while half the people she studied with were still sending out resumes and praying. 25. Let that sit for a second. She spent the next 8 years as a tenant rights attorney in Atlanta. 8 years in courtrooms, in housing authority offices, in apartments where the ceiling was caving in and the landlord was charging $1,200 a month for the privilege of living under it. She knew building codes the way most people know their own phone number. She knew Georgia housing law backward and forward and sideways, and she was good. Not just competent, not just sharp, the kind of good that made slumlords' attorneys ask for continuances just to buy time because they knew what was coming. Then, the Georgia Department of Community Affairs recruited her. Senior Housing Compliance Investigator. That was the title on her badge. The real title, the one her colleagues used when they talked about her in the break room, was something closer to closer. Because Denise Carter closed cases. Permanently. 11 slumlords across the state of Georgia had their properties seized, their licenses revoked, their names dragged through civil court and nailed to the wall of public record because of this woman. 11. Not complaints filed, not warning letters sent. Shut down, done. Exposed wiring fixed or buildings condemned. Mold remediated or tenants relocated at the landlord's expense. Exposed, fined, finished. And here's the part that should make your skin crawl if you're a landlord cutting corners in the state of Georgia. Her method. Denise didn't sit in an office downtown reviewing paperwork and sending politely worded letters. She moved in. Undercover. She'd take her name off the state directory, sign a lease under her maiden name, dress plain, drive an old car, and become a tenant. Just another renter nobody paid attention to. She'd live in the unit, sleep in the unit, cook in the unit, and every single day she was documenting photographs, timestamps, temperature readings on the hot water that never got hot, moisture levels on the walls that were growing black mold behind the drywall, voltage readings on exposed wiring that could kill somebody in their sleep. She'd build the case from the inside, brick by brick, violation by violation, until the file was so thick and so airtight that by the time the landlord found out who she was, the only question left was how much they were going to lose. 11 times she'd done this. 11 landlords who looked at her and saw nobody. Every single one of them regretted it. Now, Magnolia Ridge. The complaints started trickling into the department about 14 months before Denise ever set foot on that property. Mold in the bathrooms, no hot water for weeks at a stretch, exposed electrical wiring in the laundry room that had been reported 3 times and never touched. Rodent infestation so bad that one tenant described hearing scratching inside the walls every night like clockwork. Bad enough on its own. Neglect. Dangerous neglect. The kind that gets people sick, gets people hurt, gets people killed. But that wasn't what flagged it for the department's civil rights unit. It was the pattern. 3 black families at Magnolia Ridge filed maintenance complaints over a 6-month window. All 3 received sudden rent increases within 30 days of complaining. Not small ones either. $200, $300 a month, with 14 days' notice and no explanation beyond a form letter about market adjustments. Market adjustments. In a complex where the hallway carpet hadn't been replaced since the Clinton administration. Sure, Glen. And then there was the Robinson family. The Robinsons reported a gas leak in their unit. A gas leak. The kind of thing where you call the fire department, you evacuate, you fix it immediately because people could die. What did Glen Burkhart do? He served them a 30-day notice to vacate. No remediation, no repair. No inspection, just get out. The Robinsons fought it, hired a legal aid attorney, and lost because the eviction was technically filed under a lease technicality Glen's people dug up after the fact. A retaliatory eviction dressed up in paperwork just clean enough to survive a county judge who didn't look too hard. The pattern was consistent. The pattern was damning. This wasn't just a lazy landlord letting his buildings fall apart. This was targeted. Black tenants who spoke up got punished. Black tenants who stayed quiet got ignored. And Glen Burkhart sat in his white Escalade with that silver Bluetooth earpiece blinking in his left ear, collecting rent checks and pretending the mold wasn't his problem. When the case file landed on Denise's desk, she didn't hesitate. She volunteered. Her supervisor asked if she was sure. Magnolia Ridge was rural, isolated, a 2-hour drive from the nearest DCA field office. Denise said she was sure. She'd seen this before. 11 times before. So she prepared. The way she always prepared. Methodical, quiet, deliberate. She pulled her maiden name for the lease application. She loaded up the 12-year-old Honda Accord, the one with the dent in the rear quarter panel and the AC that only worked on the highway. She packed plain clothes, cotton sundresses, undershirts, nothing that would make anyone look twice. She slipped on the teal flip-flops from the dollar store. The thin gold wedding band stayed on her left ring finger, the only piece of her real life she never removed. Denise Carter drove her 12-year-old Honda Accord into the Magnolia Ridge parking lot, signed a lease under her maiden name, and moved into Unit 7B. She unpacked 2 suitcases and a laundry basket. She looked like every other tenant Glen Burkhart would ignore. That was the point. The first thing Denise noticed about Unit 7B was the smell. Not the kind you get used to, the kind that tells you something behind the walls is rotting. She didn't unpack that first night. She sat on the bare mattress the previous tenant had left behind, thin gold wedding band catching the glow of a single bare bulb overhead, and she breathed through her mouth. Then she got to work. See, most people would have called the landlord, filed a complaint, maybe posted something angry online. Denise Carter wasn't most people. Denise Carter had a state-issued digital camera, a box of sterile swab kits from a lab supply catalog, and 6 months of patients coiled up inside her like a spring nobody had touched yet. That first week, she waited until after 11 at night. The hallway lights at Magnolia Ridge flickered on a timer. 45 seconds of dim yellow, then darkness. She learned the rhythm. And in those dark windows, with her flat twist updo tucked under a cotton scarf, she unscrewed the outlet cover in her bedroom with a butter knife. Behind it, the wiring looked like something out of a nightmare. Exposed copper, frayed insulation crumbling into dust, scorch marks on the drywall where a short had already happened and nobody bothered to fix it. She photographed everything. 14 shots from different angles, time-stamped, geotagged, uploaded to a secure server before she screwed the cover back on. The bathroom mirror came next. It was mounted with drywall anchors that practically fell out when she gripped the frame. Behind the glass, a colony of black mold spread across the wall like a bruise that had been growing for years. Dark, wet, alive. She swabbed 3 separate samples, sealed them in sterile tubes, labeled each one with the date, the unit number, and the exact location on the wall. Those tubes went into a padded mailer addressed to the State Environmental Health Lab in Raleigh. She drove 20 minutes to a post office 2 towns over to mail it. Couldn't risk the local one. Couldn't risk anything. The basement was the crown jewel. She found it on her 3rd week, during a night when the building's water heater clanked so loud it woke half the floor. She followed the sound down a concrete stairwell that smelled like rust and standing water. And there it was. The boiler. A hulking cast-iron thing that should have had a county inspection sticker on its front panel. Should have. But somebody had peeled that sticker off. Somebody had painted over the spot with a thick dab of industrial gray to hide the rectangular outline where the condemned notice used to be. Denise ran her thumb across the paint. Still slightly tacky compared to the older coat around it. Recent work. Deliberate work. She photographed the panel, the painted-over rectangle, the absence of any current inspection certificate. She noted the boiler's serial number in her notebook. She'd run it against county records later. And she would, because that's who Denise was. Thorough, methodical, quiet as a scalpel. Now let me tell you about Mrs. Yolanda Freeman. Unit 4A, end of the hall on the 2nd floor. Mrs. Freeman was 73 years old, retired from 31 years as a school cafeteria supervisor, and she had arthritis in both knees that made the stairwell a daily act of courage. All she'd ever asked for, was a handrail on the back staircase. That's it. A metal rail bolted to the wall so she wouldn't fall and break her hip. Glen Burkhart's response? A 72-hour eviction warning slipped under her door. No stated cause, just a form letter with his signature at the bottom and a line about lease violations that cited nothing specific. Mrs. Freeman was shaking when she showed Denise the letter. Sitting at her little kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, voice barely above a whisper, afraid that talking about it would make it worse, afraid that asking for help was what got her in trouble in the first place. Denise sat across from her, back straight, hands clasped on the table, chin level, patient. She asked Mrs. Freeman if she could record their conversation. Mrs. Freeman said yes. That recording, 22 minutes long, would become Exhibit 14 in the file. Then there was Keisha, Unit 6C, a young woman, maybe 22, working double shifts at the distribution warehouse off Route 9. Keisha had been begging for mold remediation for 5 months. 5 months of handwritten maintenance requests slipped under the property office door. 5 months of nothing. Meanwhile, her apartment walls were streaked with the same black mold Denise had found behind her own mirror, except worse. Darker. Thicker. Keisha's family member, an elderly relative she cared for, had developed a persistent cough that wouldn't quit. Keisha had the medical paperwork, she had the dates, she had everything except someone who would listen. Denise listened. She documented every inch of Keisha's unit, photographed the mold in the bathroom, the bedroom closet, the kitchen ceiling where water damage had warped the drywall into a sagging brown bulge. She cataloged every maintenance request Keisha had submitted, dates, descriptions, responses received. The responses column was almost entirely blank, and here's where the pattern became undeniable. Denise pulled the maintenance logs she'd been quietly compiling, cross-referenced them with unit numbers and tenant names. White tenants in units 2A, 3B, and 5A. Repairs completed within 48 hours. Leaky faucet fixed. Broken thermostat replaced. Cracked window sealed and painted. Black tenants in units 4A, 6C, 7B, and 8D. Requests ignored. Then threatened. Then pushed toward eviction. Specific dates, specific requests, specific silences in response. Glen himself confirmed the pattern without knowing it. His visits to Magnolia Ridge were rare, maybe once a month, always performative. He'd stroll through the hallway in that white polo with the navy stripe at the collar, Bluetooth earpiece blinking blue in his left ear, chest puffed out like he owned a palace instead of a rotting filing cabinet of code violations. He'd knock on the doors of white tenants, shake hands, promise upgrades, talk about new countertops. He never knocked on a single black tenant's door, not once. Denise watched from her window. She watched from the stairwell. She noted every visit, every unit he entered, every unit he walked past without breaking stride. The case file grew thick. Photographs, lab results confirming toxic black mold at levels 3 times the state safety threshold. Recorded conversations, maintenance logs with damning gaps. County boiler records showing the Unit 7B boiler had been condemned 14 months ago and never replaced. Denise uploaded everything to a secure state server, redundant backups, encrypted files, chain of custody documented for every single piece of evidence. She knew she had enough. A lesser investigator would have pulled the trigger already, but Denise waited. She wanted more than neglect on the record. She wanted retaliation. She wanted Glen Burkhart to do what men like him always do when they feel powerful. She wanted him to punish someone for daring to ask for basic human dignity. Because neglect gets you a fine, retaliation gets you buried. 6 months of photographs, 6 months of lab results, 6 months of recorded conversations and cataloged lies. Denise had built the kind of case that doesn't just get a landlord fined, it gets a landlord buried. And Glen Burkhart had no idea the woman in the lavender sundress was holding the shovel. Denise had been patient for 6 months. Then she did the one thing she knew would make Glen Burkhart show exactly who he was. She submitted a maintenance request. Not a phone call, not a knock on the office door. Not a verbal complaint he could wave away with that meaty hand and a "we'll get to it." A formal, written, dated maintenance request on Pinewood Commons' own carbonless triplicate form. The ones Glen kept in a plastic bin behind the front desk and never expected anyone to actually use. She filled it out in neat block letters. Unit 7B, bathroom ceiling. Visible black mold growth along grout lines and ventilation duct. Respiratory symptoms reported. Immediate remediation requested per Georgia Landlord Tenant Code, Section 44-7-13. She signed it, she dated it, she kept the yellow copy for herself and slid the white and pink copies under the office door at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. And then she waited. Because Denise Carter knew Glen Burkhart the way a surgeon knows an X-ray. She'd spent 6 months studying the man, cataloging his patterns, recording his responses. She knew he wouldn't fix the mold. Fixing the mold would mean admitting the mold existed, and admitting the mold existed would mean accountability. And accountability was a language Glen Burkhart had never learned to speak. He spoke one language: control. So she knew exactly what his answer would be. It came 3 days later. Not a repair crew, not a remediation specialist, Not even a bottle of bleach and a half-hearted apology. What showed up in Denise's mailbox was a single-page typed notice on Pinewood Commons letterhead, informing her that her monthly rent was being increased by 40%, effective in 7 days. 7 days. Not 30, not 60, 7. That thin gold wedding band caught the light as Denise held the paper up and read it twice. Her expression didn't change. Her breathing didn't quicken. She stood on the concrete walkway outside Unit 7B in her faded lavender sundress and dollar store teal flip-flops, and she read every word like she was grading a paper that had already failed. Because here's the thing about a 40% rent increase with 7 days' notice in the state of Georgia: it's illegal. It violates the lease terms. It violates state code. It violates basic math, basic decency, and basic common sense. But Glen didn't care about any of that. Glen cared about making a problem go away. And in his mind, Denise Carter was the problem. Not the mold, not the rotting drywall, not the fact that his building was slowly poisoning people. The woman who had the nerve to write it down on paper. She was the problem. So Denise responded on paper too. She drafted a letter. Typed, single-spaced, 1 page. She cited the lease. Paragraph 4, Section B, the clause requiring 60 days written notice for any rent adjustment. She cited Georgia Code. She cited the maintenance request she'd already filed. She noted that retaliatory rent increases in response to habitability complaints constituted a violation under state law and could trigger investigation by the Department of Community Affairs. She was calm. She was precise. Every sentence landed like a nail driven flush with the wood. Legally devastating on paper. Glen read it in his office with his feet up on the desk and his silver Bluetooth earpiece blinking blue in his left ear. And he laughed. Actually laughed. Tossed it in the trash can next to his mini-fridge. Because Glen Burkhart didn't care about paper. Paper was for people who played by rules. Glen played by weight. Who had it, who didn't. And in his calculation, a woman in flip-flops living alone in Unit 7B had none. That was the miscalculation that would end him. But he didn't know it yet. He was still laughing. What happened next was textbook. And I mean that literally. What Glen did next is printed in tenant rights handbooks as the single most illegal thing a landlord can do in the state of Georgia. He waited for Denise to leave. It was a Saturday. Denise drove her 10-year-old Camry out of the lot around 9 in the morning to pick up her daughter from summer camp 2 counties over. Glen watched her pull out from his office window, waited 10 minutes. Then he radioed Dale. Dale Renfro showed up at Unit 7B with his ring of brass maintenance keys jangling on the retractable lanyard clipped to his belt loop. Shaggy, dark brown hair falling over his ears, hazel green eyes pointed at the ground. That small, dark mole below his right earlobe catching shadow as he tilted his head and didn't ask a single question. He changed the locks, drilled out the old deadbolt, installed a new latch, and snapped a heavy-duty padlock through the hasp. Then he carried Denise's belongings out of the apartment, her suitcases, her boxes, her hanging clothes still on the hangers, and set them on the sidewalk in front of the door like trash on collection day. No court order. No written notice, no sheriff, no hearing, no due process of any kind. Just a stocky man in a white polo shirt with a navy-striped collar standing in his office giving orders, and a kid with dusty steel-toe boots doing what he was told. A textbook illegal eviction, the kind that doesn't just get you fined, the kind that gets you arrested. When Denise pulled back into the Pinewood Commons lot that afternoon, the Georgia sun was pressing 93 degrees, and her belongings were wilting on hot concrete. Her flat twist updo was neat. Her back was straight. The faint birthmark on her left temple caught the light as she stepped out of the Camry and saw the padlock on her door. She stood there for a long moment, hands at her sides, chin level, not shaking, not crying, looking. This was the cold open. This was the moment. But now you understand what you didn't understand before. This wasn't a woman being broken. This was an investigator watching her subject commit the final act she needed on record. 6 months of evidence, 6 months of photographs and lab results and recorded conversations. And now, an illegal lockout performed in broad daylight on a tenant who had filed a written habitability complaint 72 hours earlier. Glen's chest puffed forward as he crossed the lot toward her, arms folded, chin tilted up. "I told you, this ain't your kind of place anymore." That pale blue stare, that smug, fleshy grin. "You should have taken the hint when you had the chance." Denise looked at him, calm, level, the light scatter of freckles across the bridge of her nose, that thin gold wedding band. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Burkhart," she said, "everything you just did is on camera, and everything before it is on file." One sentence, delivered like a period at the end of a very long paragraph. Glen's Escalade pulled out of the lot, gravel popping under the tires. Dale stood by the padlocked door, keyring jangling, still not making eye contact. And Denise Carter sat on a curb in the Georgia heat with everything she needed, not in her suitcases, but on her phone. Glen drove away laughing. Denise sat on the curb and went to work. No tears, no shaking hands, no calling a friend to vent. She pulled her phone from the pocket of that faded lavender sundress, and her thumbs moved with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her head for 6 months. The thin gold wedding band caught the last copper light of the Georgia sun as she scrolled through her contacts and pressed the first name. Her supervisor at the Department of Community Affairs picked up on the second ring. A woman named Lorraine Gaines, who'd been running housing enforcement investigations in the state of Georgia for 22 years. Denise didn't raise her voice, didn't editorialize. She laid it out flat. Illegal lockout. No court order, no writ of possession. Personal property padlocked inside the unit. Retaliatory action following a maintenance complaint. All of it documented. All of it recorded. She asked for one thing. Authorization to escalate. Lorraine said 2 words. "Do it." That was all Denise needed. Second call. Holt County Code Enforcement Office. Now, most county offices close at 5, and the clock on Denise's phone read 4:53. But Denise didn't call the general line. She called Raymond Osei's direct number. Raymond, broad-shouldered, military-straight posture, that thick manila clipboard always in his left hand, had been the senior code enforcement officer in Holt County for 11 years. He and Denise had crossed paths on 3 prior investigations. He trusted her work because her work was meticulous. She requested an emergency inspection of Magnolia Ridge Apartments, not as a tenant filing a grievance, as a credentialed state investigator with standing to compel a county-level response. Raymond didn't hesitate. The silver at his temples might have made him look patient, but the man moved fast when he smelled rot. He fast-tracked the inspection request and told her he'd have a team on site within 48 hours. 2 calls down, 1 to go. The third call was the one that would turn Glen Burkhart's world inside out. Denise dialed a federal fair housing enforcement attorney named Claudia Voss. They'd worked together for years, 2 prior cases, both resulting in consent decrees against property management companies in South Georgia. Claudia was sharp, she was relentless, and she had the full weight of the federal government behind her signature. Denise laid out the pattern. Not just her unit, not just one leaking ceiling or one retaliatory lockout, the whole picture. The racial disparity in maintenance response times. White tenants got same-day repairs, black tenants waited weeks or never got a call back at all. The retaliatory rent increases that only hit units occupied by black families after they complained about habitability. The illegal evictions. No court filings, no proper notice, just padlocks and intimidation, and a property manager who thought "people like you" was a complete legal argument. Claudia listened to every word, asked 3 clarifying questions. Then she said she'd file a federal fair housing complaint by morning. 3 phone calls, exposed no emotion, raised no voice, total elapsed time, 19 minutes. And then Denise opened her laptop, right there on the curb. The concrete was still warm from the day's heat. Mosquitoes were starting to circle under the parking lot light that buzzed and flickered because Glen never bothered to replace the bulb. Denise balanced the laptop on her knees, connected to her phone's hotspot, and logged into the secure state server. Her freckled nose was lit blue by the screen glow. Her flat twist updo hadn't moved an inch all day. Her posture was straight-backed, deliberate, chin level. She looked like a woman filling out paperwork at a library. She was uploading a bomb. 6 months of dated photographs, every water stain, every mold bloom, every exposed wire, every roach carcass she'd swept into a plastic bag and labeled with a date and unit number. Lab results from the mold samples she'd sent to an independent testing facility on her own dime. Toxic black mold confirmed, 3 separate units. Recorded conversations. Georgia is a one-party consent state, and Denise was always the consenting party. Glen's voice on those recordings saying things like, "Y'all should be grateful I even rent to you," and "If you don't like it, there's plenty of shelters." Every lease document, every rent increase notice, every maintenance request submitted in writing and never answered. She uploaded all of it, every file timestamped, every violation cross-referenced to the corresponding Georgia code section, every piece of evidence linked to a specific tenant, a specific unit, a specific date. This wasn't a folder of complaints. This was a prosecution-ready case file built by a woman who understood exactly how the system worked, because she worked inside it. And here's what Glen Burkhart did not know, did not suspect, could not have imagined, because in his mind, Denise Carter was just another quiet black woman in cheap flip-flops who should have been grateful for the roof over her head. This wasn't a tenant complaint anymore. It was a state investigation, a county code enforcement action, and a federal civil rights case. All 3 converging on the same cracked gravel parking lot where Glen had stood 2 hours ago, chest puffed out in that white polo with the navy stripe, silver Bluetooth earpiece blinking blue, telling a state housing investigator to get her filthy hands off his property. 3 systems, 3 levels of government, all pointed at one man who thought he was untouchable. After the uploads finished, Denise closed the laptop. She gathered her daughter from the neighbor's unit, the only neighbor who'd risked Glen's retaliation to help, and they drove to a motel off the county highway. Nothing fancy. Stiff sheets, a window AC unit that rattled, a Bible in the nightstand drawer. Denise tucked her daughter in, pulled the thin comforter up to her chin, kissed her forehead. Then she sat at the small pressboard desk by the window, opened the laptop again, and reviewed the case file one more time. Page by page, photo by photo, recording by recording. The birthmark on her left temple near the hairline was barely visible in the lamplight. Her hands were still. Her breathing was even. She wasn't angry. She was precise. By midnight, the case file was on 3 desks, state, county, and federal. Glen Burkhart was asleep in his 4-bedroom house on Lakeview Drive, dreaming about rent checks. He had about 39 hours of peace left. 41 hours later, Glen Burkhart pulled his white Escalade into the Magnolia Ridge parking lot and saw something that made his stomach drop. 3 government vehicles, not 1, not 2, 3, parked in a neat row right in front of Building A, their official seals catching the morning sun like little promises of destruction. A Holt County code enforcement van sat behind them, its back doors swung open, equipment cases stacked on the asphalt. And beyond all of that, positioned at the perfect angle to capture the entire front of the complex, a news van from the local NBC affiliate with its satellite mast already extended toward the sky. Glen's ruddy face drained of color before he even turned off the engine. His thick fingers gripped the steering wheel. The silver Bluetooth earpiece in his left ear blinked blue, 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 like a little heartbeat counting down the seconds he had left. He sat there for maybe 10 full seconds, pale blue eyes scanning the scene, that barrel chest rising and falling faster than it should have been. Then he shoved the door open, planted his scuffed brown loafers on the pavement, and marched toward the entrance of Building A, with his chin tilted up and his arms already crossing over that white polo shirt. He made it about 40 feet before he met Raymond Osei. Now, let me tell you about Inspector Raymond Osei, because this man deserves a proper introduction. broad-shouldered, solid. 6'1", deep brown skin, close-cropped black hair going silver at the temples, like he'd earned every single one of those gray hairs in the field. Dark brown eyes that didn't wander, didn't blink more than they needed to. A faint birthmark sat on the right side of his neck, just above his collar. Light freckles dusted his left cheek. He wore a short-sleeve white button-down with a Holt County Code Enforcement patch on the left shoulder, tucked crisp into navy blue work trousers. Black rubber-soled shoes, clean. Military straight posture, shoulders squared, feet planted, head level. An immovable presence. And in his left hand, held like it was part of his body, a thick manila clipboard. Not thick like a few pages, thick like a novella. Thick, like a man who had been inside this building for 2 hours already and had found enough to write a book about it. Osei stood at the entrance to the boiler room, calm, patient, waiting. Glen stormed up to him with every ounce of chest-forward authority a man in khakis and a polo can muster, which, against Raymond Osei, was not much. "This is my property," Glen barked. "Who the hell authorized this? I didn't get a call. I didn't get a notice. You can't just walk onto my property and start—" Osei raised one hand, just one, palm flat, and Glen stopped talking. That's the thing about men like Glen. They bark loud, but only at people they think can't bark back. Raymond Osei could bark back. Raymond Osei didn't need to. Instead, he reached into the clipboard, calmly, methodically, and produced a single sheet of paper, held it out between 2 fingers. "Emergency inspection order," Osei said, voice like gravel poured slow. "Signed by Judge Whitfield, Holt County Superior Court, dated yesterday." Glen snatched the paper, read it again. His square jaw worked side to side like he was chewing something that wouldn't go down. You can't just— I have rights as a property owner." "You do," Osei said, "and your tenants have rights too. That's why I'm here." Cold, final, the kind of sentence that closes a door and locks it. Then Osei opened the clipboard, and he started reading. 37 violations. Let that number sit in your chest for a second. 37. Exposed wiring in units 3A, 4C, 5B, 7A, and 9D. Bare copper running along baseboards with no junction boxes, no covers, nothing between a frayed wire and a sleeping tenant, but drywall and prayer. Black mold in the walls of 6 units, confirmed by lab swabs taken that morning, the kind of mold that gets into lungs and stays there. Rodent infestation evidence in the kitchen walls of Building B, droppings, gnaw marks on PVC piping, nesting material pulled from insulation that should have been replaced a decade ago. And then the boiler. Oh, the boiler. Osei walked Glen right up to it. That same ancient unit in the basement, the one with the rust creeping up its side like a disease. The condemnation sticker was gone, of course. Glen had peeled it off, painted right over the spot where it had been, a fresh little rectangle of industrial gray sitting on top of years of neglect, like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. But here's the thing about cover-ups. They only work if nobody's looking. Osei held up a lab report, paint analysis. The gray paint on that boiler matched. Exactly, chemically, down to the batch. A purchase made at Dawson's Hardware on Route 9. A purchase made on a credit card registered to Magnolia Ridge Properties, LLC. Glen Burkhart, sole member. He painted over a condemnation sticker on a boiler that could blow, and the receipt had his name on it. That's not negligence. That's deliberate. That's a man who knew the danger and chose rent checks over human lives. 12 of the 37 violations were classified as immediate life safety hazards. The boiler alone carried a $50,000 penalty. Glen's face went from pale to gray. The same gray as that paint, actually, which felt poetic in the worst possible way. His arms uncrossed, his chest deflated. The chin that had been tilted up since he stepped out of the Escalade slowly dropped. And then she stepped forward. From the small cluster of officials near Building B, moving without hurry, hands at her sides, posture straight-backed and deliberate. Denise Carter. Same flat twist updo, jet black and neat. Same faded lavender sundress over a white undershirt. Same teal flip-flops from the dollar store. Same thin gold wedding band catching the light on her left ring finger. Same woman Glen had sneered at in the hallway. Same woman he'd called trash to her face. But now there was something new around her neck. A state-issued lanyard, and on it an ID badge. Senior Housing Compliance Investigator, Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Inspector Osei closed the clipboard. 37 violations, 12 immediate life safety hazards, a condemned boiler, a federal fair housing complaint. Glen Burkhart's mouth was open but nothing was coming out, and Denise Carter stood 5 feet away in the same lavender sundress, the same flat twist, the same teal flip-flops, with a state lanyard around her neck that told him exactly who had been living in Unit 7B for the last 6 months. Glen Burkhart finally found his voice. He said 4 words. "I want my lawyer." Denise didn't blink. She didn't need to. The clipboard had already spoken. See, that's the thing about paperwork. You can't intimidate it. You can't puff out your chest at it. You can't cross your arms and tilt your chin up and say, "I own this conversation," to a stack of documented violations signed, dated, and photographed over 6 months by a woman who knew exactly what she was looking at. Glen wanted his lawyer. Cool. His lawyer was about to have the worst week of his career, too. Inspector Raymond Osei, shoulders squared, feet planted, that thick manila clipboard held steady in his left hand like a shield, didn't even acknowledge the request. He didn't have to. This wasn't a negotiation. He pulled a pre-printed form from beneath the violation stack, clicked his pen once, and signed at the bottom. Property license for Magnolia Ridge Apartments. Suspended. Effective immediately. Not pending review. Not under consideration. Suspended. Right there in the gravel parking lot, under a sky that smelled like magnolia and consequences. But it didn't stop at Magnolia Ridge. Of course it didn't. Glen Burkhart owned 2 other rental properties in Holt County, a duplex on Carver Street and a 4-plex near the old Cotton Gin on Route 9. Both flagged, both scheduled for emergency inspection within 72 hours. Every unit, every wall, every wire, every pipe. The man who couldn't be bothered to fix Mrs. Freeman's handrail was about to have county inspectors crawling through every square foot of property with his name on it. And then Osei handed him one more document, a wrongful eviction charge, for the illegal lockout of Unit 7B, for changing the locks on a tenant who was current on rent, who had filed no lease violations, who had done nothing, except document the truth. Glen's ruddy face went from pink to white to something close to gray. That silver Bluetooth earpiece blinked blue in his left ear like a tiny heartbeat nobody was calling. Now here's where it gets federal. The pattern Denise had documented wasn't just negligence. It was selective negligence. White tenants at Magnolia Ridge got their maintenance requests handled within a week. Leaky faucet in 3A, fixed. Broken window latch in 5C, replaced. But black tenants? Ignored, retaliated against, pushed out. Mrs. Freeman asked for a handrail for 8 months and got nothing but attitude. Keisha in 4A reported black mold growing behind her bathroom wall, and Glen told her to buy some bleach. The Robinson family, illegally evicted 4 months before Denise ever moved in, had complained about exposed wiring in their unit and found a 30-day notice taped to their door the next week. A pattern. A clear, documented, undeniable pattern of racial discrimination in housing. That pattern triggered a federal fair housing complaint. Full investigation. The kind with subpoenas and depositions and agency letterhead that makes landlords lose sleep for years. Glen's attorney, a man named Whitfield who wore bow ties and charged $400 an hour, reviewed the complaint and told Glen to settle. Quickly. Quietly. Write the checks, sign the agreements, make it go away before the federal government turned his entire rental portfolio inside out. Glen refused, because of course he did. Pride. Stubbornness. The unshakable belief that a man like him couldn't possibly lose to a woman like her. A woman in teal flip-flops. A woman he'd looked dead in the face and called, "You people." That stubbornness cost him everything. The case went to district court. It became a landmark ruling. Glen Burkhart's name was read aloud in a Holt County courtroom alongside every violation, every ignored work order, every retaliatory notice, every family he'd pushed out of their homes for daring to ask for basic human dignity. The judge read the list for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of Glen Burkhart's own cruelty recited back to him under fluorescent lights while he sat in a suit he'd probably bought for the occasion, jaw clenched, pale blue eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The tenants got justice. Mrs. Freeman got her handrail, installed by a court-appointed contractor, inspected twice, with a formal written apology from the property owner on county letterhead. Keisha's apartment was fully remediated. New drywall, new ventilation, professional mold abatement. She was awarded 18 months of back rent. The Robinson family, who'd been scattered across 2 counties after their illegal eviction, was contacted by the court and offered full restitution. Moving costs, rent differential, damages. Every dollar Glen Burkhart tried to save by ignoring black tenants came back multiplied and due. And Glen's empire? It didn't collapse with an explosion. No dramatic moment, no scene. It collapsed with paperwork. Fines stacking on fines, license suspensions across 3 properties, legal fees that bled his accounts dry month after month, federal sanctions that made it impossible to acquire new properties or refinance existing ones. The man who stood chest forward in a white polo shirt with a navy-striped collar and told Denise Carter, "I own this conversation," couldn't afford to own a conversation with his own attorney anymore. Whitfield dropped him as a client by autumn. Glen Burkhart, who once controlled 42 rental units in Holt County, was down to 0 and drowning in debt before the magnolias bloomed again. Denise packed her suitcases into the Honda. 2 bags, same ones she arrived with 6 months ago. She folded the lavender sundress neatly, set it on top, put her daughter in the back seat, buckled the seatbelt, didn't give a speech, didn't gloat, didn't look back at the building. That thin gold wedding band caught the afternoon light as she turned the key in the ignition, and the old engine turned over the way it always did, patient and reliable. In the rearview mirror, Magnolia Ridge got smaller. Glen Burkhart stood in his own parking lot holding a citation he couldn't talk his way out of, watching the woman he called, "You people," dismantle his empire with a clipboard and the truth. Denise adjusted the mirror, checked on her daughter in the back seat, and pulled onto the county road. She had work to do. She always did. Because this was never just about Glen Burkhart. This is about every landlord who looks at a black woman in flip-flops and sees someone they can push around. Someone too small, too quiet, too easy to ignore. Denise Carter has shut down 12 slumlords now, exposed them with patience and documentation and the kind of quiet dignity that makes arrogant men underestimate her every single time. And somewhere in Georgia, number 13 is about to meet a new tenant who drives an old Honda and doesn't say much. Yet.